Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. We're going to do another Spaceship to the Absolute. So, Josh is your pilot today, and I'm the co-pilot. And we're going to talk about, because it was recently Gurdjieff's anniversary of his death day, and we were going to talk about death. And the word that Gurdjieff uses in his books is raskuanu. So, Josh, do you want to perhaps explain a little bit about what this raskuanu is?
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. I do. I like the word. I don't know why. It's always appealed to me for some reason when when I was reading Beelzebub's Tale. It's just like, I don't know like the correct pronunciation. I just pronounce it, yeah, Rascuano. But I don't know, for some reason I've always liked the sound of it. It just seems like an apt word for, I suppose, well, what he's kind of talking about. In Beelzebub's Tales, he does seem to suggest, he kind of links it with explicitly, I suppose, with death, or the process of death. And he describes that man obviously has, or can have, more than one body. And in Beelzebub's Tales, he talks about man as having three bodies. So he has his what he calls the physical body, the Kesdjan body, and like the soul body. And so he says that, yeah, like upon physical death, that the Kesdjan body kind of separates from the physical body. And he describes that in Beelzebub's Tales as like a Rascuano. You could possibly say like the first death or the first Rascuano. So kind of says that, yeah, the Kesdjan body separates from the physical body on death. And I think he says that it kind of like, he describes that process as if imagine the Kesdjan body sort of leaving the physical body. Like, we might imagine a kind of an energy body or some kind of atmosphere or something that leaves the physical body. And then he like describes it as sort of, I think he says it kind of rises to a sphere, he says, or like almost like an altitude that corresponds with its quality, So I suppose you could look at that maybe in like religious terms, that like upon death, depending on what state that second body is in, will determine, you could say, like the kind of afterlife fate, like if certain qualities maybe have been developed in that second body, then maybe it'll sort of rise to a corresponding sort of, say, altitude or realm in that afterlife realm. Say if we call it the astral body, we could say that the astral realm is say just a large realm, and so it has different sort of environments, if you like, in that realm, and that the second body or the astral body will go to the corresponding realm, the corresponding conditions that sort of match to it, and I suppose, like, yeah, in Christianity and other traditions as well, there is that idea that, I suppose, the average, quote unquote average man, when he dies, he tends to die in a state that's sort of akin to sleep, or akin to like dreaming, at night. And in that sense, that I suppose possibly people don't tend to have that much of awareness of their dreams or themselves when they're dreaming. Not much of a kind of not many people, I suppose, report having sort of lucid dreams, where they're kind of aware that they're dreaming, So in that sense, it could be like saying that, yeah, the general man dies, but there isn't really much awareness, you might say, that he has died. And maybe the realm that he goes to then is correspondingly of a kind of a low level awareness. He doesn't have much sort of lucidity or volition. So again, there are ideas about like people being stuck in sort of limbo, or like, souls not kind of having developed. And you could imagine that like almost like a state of dreaming where like the person then, or the Kesdjan body, the astral body, might undergo all sorts of, let's say, experiences, but there wouldn't be much of a lucid element there, or much of a volitional element there. So it could be like undergoing, well, it could be like pleasant experiences or unpleasant experiences, but there just wouldn't be much sort of, yeah, consciousness or intentionality there. Like an idea of like somebody that almost being stuck in a bardo realm or something.
Well, yeah, because they talked a lot about this with I've forgotten the name of the guy that wrote the I've forgotten, but anyway, but he talks about Evan's book on the bardo, and how it's important to understand the bardo to understand the Gurdjieff work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not just, is it, he debates as to whether it's the same as the dream world, or is it a higher version of
Yeah,
astral realm? Maybe the astral realm has different layers, that where those that are dreaming when they're asleep are in. And then when we,
yeah,
like this body that you're talking about, if we've developed it enough, we will go to the higher
yeah.
astral realm.
Yeah, yeah, I would, I tend to agree with that kind of way of looking at it, that it's not, that you could say that there are levels in that sort of astral realm, or, different, or similar thing of just saying that people enter it in different states, and depending what kind of state they are in, will, you know, will determine their experience of it. I suppose like the physical realm, like depending on what kind of state we're in whilst we're embodied, our experience of the physical world will be quite different. Like I can wake up in the morning and maybe, I'm distracted and not really much aware of like my surroundings or myself, and maybe in like, maybe I'm in unpleasant mood or something, or another day I might wake up and feel very like, clear headed and in a positive mood. And obviously that affects my world experience. Like it's a classic thing, I suppose. If someone's sort of in a happy mood, then the world kind of reflects that. Do you know what I mean? They might feel the world as a happy place, or if they're in a sort of inner torment, then the world might appear to them as hell. So in a similar sense, you could look at the second world, the astral world, that way. Like if a person enters that and they're still maybe dominated by some of the kind of lower tendencies that they might have acquired in life, like lower states, states of negative emotion, or not much self-awareness, then it's probably likely that the same thing will play out in the astral realm. That they might enter quote unquote negative states, or just states of lesser awareness, and so the astral realm will possibly mirror that. But yeah, they do talk about it in the work that it's kind of talked about as like developing the Keston body, or trying to develop it in life, as being something akin to a kind of preparation for death. Like they do say that, I suppose, if that kind of body is developed in life, that it will have a significant impact on the death experience. Then not just maybe the process itself of like leaving the body, but yeah, the kind of the kind of state then, or world that you will enter. And I suppose the way they talk about the Keston body is that he says that it's kind of independent to the physical body, although it's obviously related to it. And so if it's developed in life, it will change your experience of the physical world. And it tends to be associated with that kind of thing of not being dominated by the kind of flesh, then, as they might say in the Bible, that if that side of us is developed, then we're not so maybe put upon by the physical world and the physical experiences, because again, it does seem, I guess, that the general person, that they tend to live in what we could say the physical world, and that's to them, that's you could say that's what's most real to them, like the world of the senses, and just the sort of the world of physical bodies and physical objects. That seems to be what's most real to them, and obviously that the physical world or the physical body, it's relatively speaking, it's quite a limited, you could say, world, or in terms of Gurdjieff, it's under more laws, it's subject to more laws than the higher world. So there's more there's more limitations there, and evidently the physical body is quite, though in other ways it's quite robust, but relatively speaking it's quite fragile. It's subject to like disease or injury, and obviously like physical death, or and certain states. And yeah, the physical body exists in that kind of world of objects that are separated from each other.
Well, we should still make the most of this life on this earth, though I know many people walk through this life asleep. But the point of the Gurdjieff work is that we try to wake up and live this life for as real as we can. And at the same time, we're developing that Keston body, which we can use in this life if we develop it. It's not just for death.
Yeah. I'm not like trying to like denigrate the physical world. I'm just saying relatively it's a more, you could say it's a more kind of limited world. And totally, like if that side of us, the Keston body, is developed in life, then that's what I'm saying, it will change our experience of the physical world, because again, the general person does seem to be you could say, like dominated by bodily states, although just that that kind of form of experience, of experiencing themselves, let's say, as a physical body who interacts with other physical bodies, and that way of experiencing things can give rise to a lot of suffering, because that side of us, you could say, is quite fragile and fallible. Again, it's a classic thing, maybe like in something like Buddhism. They say that obviously, like the Buddha, he came out of his palace and he encountered the kind of horrors of the world, like suffering, aging, and death, and illness, and things like that. So that does seem to be part and parcel of the physical nature. And so if somebody hasn't got something like within them developed, something more robust, let's call it the Keston nature, then how they navigate, they're more likely to suffer, do you see what I mean, in their physical life experience. They're more likely to be dominated by these things that occur in the physical world. So if that side of, I would suggest that if the person starts to develop their Keston body, then their experience of the physical life will change, like how they experience the physical world, how they perceive it and sense it and feel it will change. And he does speak about it as bringing a certain degree of greater liberation or greater freedom if that side is developed. I suppose he gives like simple examples in terms of like something like a fakir or something, like they can develop capacities that make them able to deal with, let's say, physical suffering. They may acquire those capacities through like doing mortifications of the body and stuff, but it's just saying that something can be developed then that is not so subject to physical states, for instance, like physical suffering or physical pain. And Gurdjieff does talk about the Keston body that way, saying that if it's developed, it has a sort of it becomes a new seat of authority. You could say like the center of gravity of our consciousness or our kind of sense of I can shift, so it's no longer so much centered in the what we experience as the physical nature and the physical body, but can shift to this kind of second body, and thereby there becomes a greater freedom from the physical nature, but also a greater kind of degree of control over it. Again, you could link the Keston body to, if it starts to be developed, that there'll be much more, you'll be much less subject to like inner states of thought and feeling and sensation. You won't be so much put upon by them. Because again, I would suggest that maybe the general person, they tend to experience themselves as possibly at the mercy of their thoughts or feelings or sensations.
Oh yes.
Yeah, like they can have states of negative thoughts going on in their head, or states of unpleasant feelings, or unpleasant physical sensations. And if there isn't something kind of more substantial, that's one way of talking about it. If there isn't something more substantial than those like states of negative thoughts and emotions or sensations, then it's like we will be dictated to by them. Or again, you might say about like identification. If there's not something there that can kind of stand apart from them, then the general person will be dominated by them. And though, yeah, of course, those states can have positive sides as well. There can be positive thoughts and feelings and sensations, but they also have the negative side. It's like in the general physical world, they kind of tend to talk about it as a sort of zero-sum game. That for every a world of opposites, for every positive or upside, there is a downside or a negative. So if there's some independence developed from like our general sort of physical condition, put it that way, then there can be a great source of freedom, because the person isn't then doesn't experience themselves as subject to or at the mercy of their like thoughts, feelings, and sensations, or their inner states.
Yeah. And it says we're not attached.
Yeah, it's like yes, something can not attached to it, not identified with it, and something kind of something independent can be developed. Like that's if this other side of us develops, then we're no longer, it's like the physical body then, let's say, then is no longer our main address. It's not like our it's no longer our home, you could say. It becomes more like an appendage or something like that, or an instrument. Do you see what I mean? If we're not centered in the physical body, and if our kind of sense of I, our identity shifts to, let's say, the indication body, then the physical body becomes, you could say, maybe more what it was intended to be, like a vehicle then, which can be used. Like, again, we're not saying that there's anything wrong with the physical world or physical experience, but if we're submerged in it and at the mercy of it, then you could say that we can't really extract the value, that's there. If you talk about the idea of the soul incarnating for, a reason, or to learn or evolve, then you could say that something needs to be developed that's able to use the physical nature rather than being sort of submerged in it,
Well, I think that's one of the problems with what's going on in this world. People don't think of this life as perhaps being a learning vessel or a teaching time. They're just in it and not aware of the potentials of it. But you talked about an appendage there, and Gurdjieff does say, I think it's towards the end of Beelzebub's Tales, and Hussein says, his grandson says to him, how can we help these slugs, the humans? And he talks about how we need a new appendage attached, not the same as Kundabuffer, but like it, that lets everyone be aware that one day they are going to die, and that everybody you set eyes on, that person will die, and it will make everybody treat each other in a much better way.
Yeah, again, it's a big thing that that I suppose we, people in general, they take it for granted that they are alive, that they were born, and they've come into this, this mysterious, from somewhere, and they've come from, somewhere into the physical world. They seem to have been born, and then, obviously it seems guaranteed that you're going to die. But it does seem that the general person doesn't tend to contemplate the reality of that. Again, people just, they just tend to get on with their lives and, go about their business, perhaps not really sort of pondering on that question, about where have I come from, or where was I before I was born, or what does it mean to be born, and thereby also what does it mean to, that I'm going to die. Again, people live in such a kind of materialistic world that I suppose they just take the story that they've been told for granted, that you were just the result of a biological interaction between your parents, just some happenstance, fertilization of an egg, and before that, there was no you, and at some point in time, you're going to die, and then there's not going to be anything. That's the kind of materialistic, the material outlook. And people, I guess, because they're told that in our kind of Western culture, they just tend to believe it, and so they maybe don't. That just seems to put the question to bed for them. They don't really have any, perhaps, interests, or concerns about pondering that, But
again, seem to think they're going to live forever. I do notice that, and I think some people think it's never going to happen to them. Like they think accidents and such, like, or the unexpected will never happen. It happens to other people.
Yeah,
I know people that see other people die, but never contemplate their own death. And in fact, they seem to be kind of relieved it's not them, or it wasn't people died, but so I see what Gurdjieff's saying here, that maybe people would act differently if they realized everybody dies. We're all going to die, unless we are lucky enough to be able to I don't know, transform like Elijah in the Bible, or the Christ himself,
Yeah, well, definitely, I think what he's saying, that if a person can kind of can kind of live with the reality of that, like particularly their own death, if they can live with the kind of fact then that they could die at any moment, then that could possibly change their experience of life. Because again, so it seems, people can spend a lot of their life in states of like frustration or confusion, or maybe like indecision, or having unfulfilled desires, or like regrets about the past and things like that. And you could say a lot of those kind of states of confusion or like frustration and indecision and negativity, you could say they come because the person isn't able to kind of live with that reality. Like if every action I did, just from as simple as like getting up in the morning and then like going to make a coffee, if everything I did from the kind of perspective that I could die, and at any moment, and possibly from the perspective that I don't know what that's going to entail, like I don't know whether there's going to be some afterlife, or or it could be my end, then theoretically that could relieve a lot of the negative states, because it's like taking responsibility then. Like it's like if anything I do knowing that I could die, then it's like you could say I'm really valuing my actions then. Anything I do because I'm choosing to do, and I'm choosing to do it knowing that that might be the last thing I do, you could say. Do you see what I mean? So then it kind of puts the onus on me to take responsibility for my choices, to take them seriously, what I decide to do, what I decide to fill my days with. And if I fully take responsibility for my choices, like I'm choosing to do this option rather than another option, and I'm choosing that knowing that I might die, then it's like I can fully live, you could say. I could fully live my choices, And again, that does seem to be the kind of opposite to perhaps the states that people generally live in, that they're never, you could say, fully doing what they're doing. They kind of might be like half doing what they're doing and then thinking about something else, or, again, living in the kind of with expectations as to the future, or perhaps regrets about the past, So that was, I think, an important idea for Gurdjieff, like being able to take responsibility for our decisions, our actions, and trying to do whatever we do with the whole of ourselves. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, we want to make the new point of living as, well, as Gurdjieff says, life is real only then when I am. We're trying to be awake enough to take in what we're doing and being, and then doing and acting correct. I was going to say correctly then, but I don't know if that's the right word, but consciously, acting consciously.
Yeah, and I think like they do say that the kind of remembrance of death is a big, can be a big like reminding factor that way. You know what I mean? Like to help us fully live and to you could say, take responsibility for our actions. Because if I'm confronting death sort of prior to anything that I do, then it's like saying, well, I'm choosing to do this option, whatever is, over another option, and I might die whilst I'm doing this, whatever I'm doing, and I can accept that. Then, do you see what I mean? I'm fully making my decision, and then kind of maybe fully valuing what I'm doing. And if I do that, it doesn't really leave any room left over for like a lot of these kind of self-doubts or concerns. Like maybe a person's in a job that they're not really satisfied with, and they're just going through the motions, and maybe they have a wish to be a painter or something, but so they kind of live between two stools, another of Gurdjieff's kind of good expressions. They may be half just doing the job that they're doing, but whilst another half of them is kind of in this desire maybe to be a painter,
just dreaming their life away, and that's wasted imagination. It takes a lot of energy as well.
Yeah, it's just like that remembrance of death and taking kind of responsibility then can free me up, because it can enable me to do what I do kind of from the whole of myself. Like again, it's like if I say to myself before I choose to do anything, well, do you really want to do this, whatever it is that you're going to do, and knowing that you might die at any time like doing it, then it brings everything into question in terms of what are your real values, what really matters to me, and if I live in a way that really matters to me, then that's kind of, in a sense, freedom, because I can act from the whole of myself without not acting partially. Like again, Gurdjieff says that we tend to live in a divided way, and we have these multiple sort of fragmentary eyes, in us, or divided psyche. So like parts of us are interested in certain things, and parts of us are not interested or are against certain things, So when we're in that kind of state, you could say, yeah, we're only like half living, we're always in two minds. Do you see what I mean? About whatever it is that we're doing. And in that state, yeah, you could say I'm not really fully living, because I'm not really fully committed to whatever it is that I'm doing. I'm not really appreciating the value of my choices. Again, when Gurdjieff was working with a lot of his students, he tended to he tended to work with them in a way that he was always putting them kind of, or trying to, you could say, putting them in a position of crisis, you know, or putting them in a position where they were going to have to make a decision, you know, perhaps a tricky decision and not knowing the outcome of it. And again, that could be very useful to this idea of taking full responsibility. You know, again, if I take full responsibility for my choices, then I won't kind of live in say regret for whatever I've done, because I'll take full responsibility that was my choice and that was what I really wanted to do. And possibly I won't live in kind of like anxiety as to the future, you know, because I'll be like doing what I'm doing and fully choosing to do it, knowing that I don't know, you know, I don't know ahead of time what the outcome will be. So you could say that that's tied up with that idea of dying before you die.
Yes.
You know.
And I know many people that seem very dead. And Gurdjieff talks about, I think you have the opportunity when up to you're 21, then again when you're 28, and if you haven't changed by the time you're 30, you're just sort of you just stay as you are. So you kind of are dead in a way, semi-dead, like a zombie.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean this idea in the more kind of positive sense, like dying before you die, in the sense that if you live with death, the reality of death, then again you could say that you're living fully responsibly and living in a way that you fully want to live. So it would be like if you lived that way, that let's say that when you got on your deathbed and perhaps like at that moment of death had a life review, you know, going back through your life. If I've lived fully, like taken responsibility for my choices, then you could say that there wouldn't be any regret, you know, or any of those things that might possibly cause a person to suffer when, you know, when they were on their deathbed, like all these regrets and things that could happen. Do you see what I mean? So again, that maybe ties into the idea of the question body. If a person only lives in a partial way and doesn't really take responsibility for their actions and fully like live their choices and do what they want to do, you know, then they will have all these regrets. You could say that they will take over to the afterlife, in which case that can bring up a lot of possibly suffering, you know.
It's interesting you said it, because the other day I was talking to someone about regrets actually, and I realized how much she was holding on to regrets of the past, and I was trying to tell her that, you know, that was holding her back. But I also, I have a few regrets as well. We all have regrets, but we have to learn to let them go, because that was the old version of you, where now you're trying to develop, if you're doing the Gurdjieff work, develop yourself so that you are aware of when these situations happen. But what's happened in the past, we can't particularly change at the moment.
Yeah, and like again, his idea that you know, in general, we live in a state of inner division with like conflicting wants and desires. You know, having different desires or having like opposed desires. You know, he does speak about some of his work about trying to be aimed at the sort of realization of a real I. You know, a kind of a wholeness to our psyche. You know, so again, if there's a kind of a wholeness to the psyche, then anything I do, I will do fully. You know, and you could say willingly by my own choice. And in that sense, again, if regardless of whatever the outcomes are of my actions, you could say I will be free from like regret or anxiety, because I can take full responsibility for them. You know, again, if I don't know like what's going to happen in the future, so I don't necessarily know, you could say, quote unquote, whether the decisions I make are a right decision or a wrong decision until, you know, that the results of that transpire. But again, if I've made the decision kind of fully consciously, then you could say that you won't be troubled by whatever those future consequences are, whether they appear to be, you know, positive or negative, because I can you know, I'm able to embrace whatever the results are, because I can take full responsibility for my choice, you see. So in that sense, fully acting with a kind of responsibility is kind of freedom. It frees you up from consequences, you know. It's not that to say that you're not going to undergo whatever those consequences are of your actions, but if you really live your choices, then you will be able to meet those consequences kind of fully, whatever they are, not with like fear or regret or those kind of things that come from acting in partial ways, you know. And again, with the development of the Keston body, they do say, like, with it being linked to the astral world, that relatively, like compared to the physical world, that astral world is kind of you could say eternal, you know, like whilst we're centered in the physical nature, we appear to live in linear time, causality and like three-dimensional space. So again, when we're living in sort of our consciousness centered in the physical world, we live in an experience of time and space. And again, that's very kind of fragmented and limited, because you only ever sort of experience yourself in one limited moment at a time. You're in that sort of fleeting present moment, where you don't know, in a sense, what the future is going to be, and the past is gone, and it's like, it's passing by at whatever rapid rate of time is, whatever the fleeting sort of present moment is, So again, like the idea is that if you kind of wake up to your sort of Keston body, which is also linked to the essence, then your experience, you'll be more connected to that sort of eternal realm, that's outside of, you could say, time, physical time and space. So again, you could link that to almost like dying before you die, in a kind of physical sense, that if you kind of wake up to your essence or your astral sort of nature, then you could say that that's the same realm that you're going to be going to when you drop the body. So if you kind of wake up to that nature, that's another way of, like, you could say, dying before you die, because you're kind of already in contact with sort of that afterlife realm, or the side of you that's beyond your physical incarnation, you see. So again, if a person...
Oh, go on.
Well, I was going to say, so again, if a person realizes that during the course of their life, that can be a massive, a massive freedom, because they're no longer navigating their life just from the position of being a limited, like, physical being, Like, again, if you kind of wake up to your essence, that's eternal. So that's beyond the side of you that kind of was born, like, appeared in time at some point in time and is going to die at another point in time,
And especially with Gurdjieff saying, the time, the merciless hero pass is kind of like the enemy for us all. But in the other realms, time doesn't seem to exist. It's only in this material world. I find that quite hard to fathom of how that works, but
yeah,
it seems to be in a lot of the esoteric schools. We're running out of time. So I think, the time is being our enemy now. But I wanted to thank you very much for this, Josh. Just tell everybody where your WordPress is.
If you type in Gurdjieff and Beelzebub, like .wordpress, I think that should take you to the page.
Yep, it comes up as the tapestry of
Beelzebub's tale.
Yeah. So, but hopefully we shall do some more of these when time is again on our side. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. And until next time, we're going to land this spaceship to the Son Absolute. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.